I transferred the last $3,000 on a Tuesday, completely unaware that I was paying for the imported marble countertops my younger brother was likely doing lines off of. For 18 grueling months, I had bled myself dry. I had eaten instant rice and frozen vegetables in a freezing, downgraded studio apartment where the radiator barely worked. I had watched my own savings account, my hard-earned future, the down payment for the home I had dreamed of for a decade, evaporate into a bottomless void, all because I believed the tears streaming down my mother's face when she told me my father's heart was literally giving out. I thought I was buying time. I thought I was keeping the man who raised me from a premature grave. Instead, I was funding a penthouse. Every single penny of the $54,000 I had sacrificed over a year and a half, money I earned by working myself to the point of physical collapse, bypassed the cardiac specialists, and went straight into the mortgage and HOA fees of a luxury high-rise condo. My dying father wasn't hooked up to monitors. He was sipping expensive scotch on a balcony, overlooking the city skyline, laughing with the very brother who had never worked a day in his 30 years of parasitic existence. The betrayal didn't just break my heart, it crystallized it into something cold, sharp, and entirely unforgiving. But to understand how I ended up legally orchestrating their complete and total ruin, to comprehend how I could coldly evict my own flesh and blood and sleep perfectly fine that night, you have to understand the trap I was born into. You have to understand the toxic normalcy that made me the perfect, willing victim. I am 34 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I have been the family's designated shock absorber. In every dysfunctional family unit, roles are assigned early and reinforced ruthlessly. My role was the fixer. I was the responsible one, the quiet achiever, the kid who got straight A's not because I was pressured to, but because I realized early on that my parents were too exhausted and distracted to manage my life. I learned to manage myself. Then there was Leo. Leo is 4 years younger than me, and from the moment he drew his first breath, he was the golden child. If my role was to be the invisible infrastructure holding the family up, Leo's role was to be the shining star we all orbited. The rules were fundamentally different for him. When I got a B in advanced calculus, I was asked what went wrong and how I planned to fix it. When Leo barely scraped by with a C in remedial English, my mother baked him a cake to celebrate his perseverance. As we grew into adulthood, this dynamic didn't just persist. It metastasized. I went to a state college, working 2 jobs to graduate without debt, and eventually clawed my way into a highly lucrative position as a senior systems architect for a major tech firm. I made good money. Great money, even, but I lived well below my means, hoarding my cash because I wanted security. I wanted a life that felt solid, unlike the chaotic paycheck-to-paycheck anxiety I had grown up with. Leo, on the other hand, embarked on a decade-long tour of expensive, parent-funded delusions. First, he was going to be a music producer. My parents took out a second mortgage to buy him top-of-the-line studio equipment, which he sold at a pawn shop 2 years later to fund a spiritual retreat in Bali. Then he was an app developer, a crypto investor, a dropshipping guru. Every single venture ended in spectacular failure, leaving behind a trail of debt that mom and dad inevitably scrambled to clean up. At 30 years old, Leo had never held a W-2 job for more than 4 consecutive weeks. He lived at home, sleeping until noon, contributing nothing, yet treated like royalty by a mother who saw his chronic laziness as untapped creative genius, and a father who simply didn't have the spine to say no. I kept my distance. I loved them, but I couldn't stand the dynamic. I lived across town in a beautiful, modern one-bedroom apartment. I was finally happy. I had crossed the 6-figure threshold in my savings, the exact amount I needed for a 20% down payment on a beautiful property I had been eyeing in the suburbs. I was casually dating, traveling occasionally, and finally reaping the rewards of my disciplined, solitary grind. Then came the phone call that shattered my reality. It was a gloomy Thursday evening in November. I had just logged off from a demanding project and was pouring myself a glass of wine when my phone buzzed. It was my mother. "Hello," I answered, expecting the usual brief check-in or a subtle request to look at one of Leo's broken laptops. "David," she choked out. The sound of her voice made my blood run instantly cold. It wasn't her usual dramatic sigh or her annoyed tone. It was a raw, primal sound of pure terror. "David, you need to come over, now." "Please." "Mom, what is it? Is someone hurt?" "It's your father," she sobbed, the phone fumbling as if she were dropping it. "Please, just get here." I didn't ask questions. I grabbed my keys, abandoned the wine, and practically flew out the door. The 30-minute drive to my childhood home was an agonizing blur of worst-case scenarios. Was it a stroke, a car accident? Had Leo finally gotten into trouble with the wrong people? When I pulled into the driveway, the house was dark except for the living room window. I burst through the front door, my chest heaving. Mom, Dad. I found them sitting on the worn, beige sofa in the living room. My mother's eyes were swollen, clutching a crumpled tissue. My father, usually a stoic and emotionally distant man, looked completely deflated, staring blankly at the coffee table. Leo was nowhere to be seen, probably out partying as usual. What happened? Are you okay? I demanded, dropping to my knees in front of my father. My mother let out a shuddering breath. She reached across the coffee table and handed me a thick manila folder. He had a fainting spell at work 2 weeks ago. We didn't want to worry you until we knew for sure. We've been doing tests. I opened the folder. Inside were what looked like medical charts, EKG printouts, and a typed letter on a clinic's letterhead. The medical jargon was dense, but my mother didn't let me read it before delivering the blow. It's his heart, David, she whispered, her voice cracking. Idiopathic progressive heart failure. His ventricles are stiffening, the doctor said. The doctor said his heart is basically giving up. The room spun. I looked at my father. He gave me a weak, brave smile that shattered every defense I had. It's all right, son, he mumbled. We all have our time. No, we don't just accept this, I said, my fixer instincts immediately kicking in, exactly as they had designed them to. What's the treatment, surgery, a transplant list? I can get you into the Mayo Clinic. I have excellent insurance. Your insurance won't cover him, honey, Mom interrupted, wiping her face. And ours is refusing to pay for the experimental treatments. They call it investigational. They won't cover the specialized peptide infusions or the out-of-state specialist consultations. They said we just have to manage his decline. That's illegal. We can sue them. We can appeal. We've tried, David, she cried, suddenly angry. We spent the last 2 weeks fighting with them. They won't budge. The only way to get him the treatments that will keep him alive, the treatments Dr. Evans says have a 90% success rate in halting the progression, is to pay out of pocket. I swallowed hard, staring at the papers. Okay. Okay, how much? Silence fell over the room. My mother looked at my father, who looked down at his hands, playing the role of the humiliated, dying patriarch perfectly. $3,000, my mother finally whispered. 3,000, I asked, for the first round. 3,000 a month, she corrected softly. Every month, for the foreseeable future. If he misses a treatment, the doctor said his heart could give out within weeks. The strain is just too much. My brain immediately went to work, calculating. $3,000 a month, $36,000 a year, post-tax money. We don't have it, David, my father said, his voice thick with shame. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. Between the second mortgage we took out for, well, to help out your brother, and our credit cards were tapped out. I'm going to have to stop working soon anyway. I can't ask this of you. It's too much. I'll sell the house, my mother sobbed, burying her face in her hands. We'll live in the car. I don't care. I just can't lose him. I sat there, the weight of the world pressing down on my shoulders. $3,000 a month was almost my entire disposable income. It meant stopping all my savings. It meant I couldn't afford my luxury apartment anymore. It meant the house I had been saving for was gone. It meant my life, as I knew it, was over. But I looked at the man who had taught me to ride a bike. I looked at the woman who had nursed me through childhood fevers. How could I put a price tag on my father's life? How could I sit in my beautiful apartment, watching my bank account grow, knowing I had let my father suffocate to death because I was greedy? The guilt they weaponized was perfect. It was flawless. You don't have to sell the house, I said, my voice remarkably steady despite the panic tearing through my chest. I'll do it. David, no, my father protested weakly, raising a hand. You've worked so hard for your money. I said I'll do it, I repeated, firmer this time. I can cover it, $3,000 a month. I'll set up an auto transfer to your account on the first of every month. My mother threw her arms around me, sobbing hysterically into my shoulder. You're saving his life, David. You're literally saving his life. You are the best son a mother could ever ask for. God bless you. I left their house that night feeling a bizarre mixture of profound grief and twisted pride. I was doing the right thing. I was a good son. The reality of my promise hit me the very next morning. I opened my budget spreadsheet and stared at the numbers. There was no way to magically create 3 grand. I had to cut the fat, and I had to cut it deep. The first casualty was my apartment. My lease was up in 2 months, but I couldn't wait. I paid the exorbitant early termination fee, burning a hole in my hard-earned savings, and moved out by the end of the week. I couldn't afford anything decent in my area, while hemorrhaging $3,000 a month, so I had to look in the grimier, older parts of the city. I ended up signing a lease on a cramped, basement-level studio apartment in a decaying building. It smelled permanently of boiled cabbage and old cigarettes. The floors were slanted, the pipes rattled loudly every time the upstairs neighbors flushed the toilet, and the single window looked out onto a brick wall lined with garbage cans. It was depressing, a stark contrast to the floor-to-ceiling windows and hardwood floors I had grown accustomed to, but it was cheap. It allowed me to make the math work. The next casualty was my time. Even with the cheap apartment, covering my basic living expenses, car insurance, gas, groceries, and the massive $3,000 monthly tribute to my parents left me with zero margin for error. If my car broke down, I'd be ruined. If I needed a dental crown, I couldn't afford it. So I started taking on freelance coding work. My regular job as an architect demanded 45 to 50 hours a week. I started spending my evenings and weekends grinding out code for startups, building websites, debugging databases, anything that paid. My life shrank down to a miserable, exhausted pinpoint. Sleep code, eat cheap food, code sleep. I stopped going out with friends. When they invited me to dinners or drinks, I lied and said I was swamped with work. I couldn't tell them I was broke. The shame of suddenly living like a struggling college student at 34 was too intense. I couldn't tell them about my dad either. I didn't have the emotional bandwidth to deal with their pity. Month 1 passed. The transfer of $3,000 went through on the 1st. Mom called me, weeping, telling me the first treatment went well and Dad was resting. Month 2 passed. Another $3,000. I bought a bulk bag of rice and lived on it for 2 weeks to make sure I had enough to cover my own electric bill. Month 3, month 4, month 5. The physical toll of 60 to 70-hour work weeks, combined with the constant baseline stress of being one emergency away from financial ruin, began to change me. I lost weight, my skin turned a permanent, sickly shade of gray. I developed a persistent tremor in my left hand from too much caffeine and too little sleep. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. But every time I felt resentment bubbling up, every time I looked around my dingy, depressing studio and felt the urge to scream, I would force myself to look at a picture of my dad on my phone. It's for him, I would tell myself, you're keeping him alive. I called home every Sunday to check on him. My mother was always the one to answer. How is he today? I would ask, rubbing my burning, exhausted eyes. He's resting, sweetheart, she would say, her voice hushed. The treatments take it out of him, but he's fighting. He's fighting so hard, David. Tell him I love him. I will. We love you too. We couldn't do this without you. It was a perfect loop of sacrifice and validation. But as the months dragged on, approaching the 1-year mark, a strange, quiet unease began to settle in the back of my mind. It started as a whisper, a slight dissonance in the narrative I was being fed. It was month 14. I had just wired my 42nd thousandth dollar to my parents. I was sitting in my basement apartment, eating a bowl of oatmeal for dinner, scrolling mindlessly through Facebook. I rarely checked social media anymore, but a notification popped up. My aunt, my mother's sister, had posted an album titled Family Barbecue. I clicked through the photos, feeling a pang of homesickness. I hadn't seen my parents in person for over a year. I was always too busy working, and they claimed my dad's immune system was too compromised from the treatments to risk visitors. I clicked to the 4th photo, and my spoon stopped halfway to my mouth. It was a wide shot of my aunt's backyard. In the background, out of focus but unmistakable, was my father, the man who supposedly had a failing, stiffening heart, the man who was supposedly bedridden and fighting for his life. He was standing by the grill. He was holding a heavy-looking cooler with one hand, laughing uproariously at something my uncle was saying, holding a beer in his other hand. His face wasn't the pale, gaunt mask of a dying man. He looked ruddy, healthy, and incredibly vibrant. He looked better than I did. I stared at the screen for a long time. The tremor in my left hand worsened. Maybe it's an old photo, I rationalized, desperate to cling to the reality where I wasn't being taken advantage of. Aunt Sarah is terrible with technology. She probably uploaded an old album by mistake. I checked the timestamp on the photo. It was taken yesterday. A cold, heavy stone dropped into the pit of my stomach. I closed my laptop, the silence of my miserable, rattling apartment suddenly deafening. The hook of doubt had been planted, and though I didn't know it yet, my descent into the truth and my path to total, devastating revenge had just begun. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the cold, flickering glow of my laptop screen for hours. The image of my father holding that cooler burned into my retinas. My basement apartment felt smaller than ever, the walls pressing in on me, vibrating with the rattle of the old refrigerator. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his ruddy cheeks. I saw the easy, effortless way he hoisted the weight. A man with progressive, end-stage heart failure, a man whose ventricles were supposedly stiffening into useless stone, does not lift a 30-pound cooler of beer with one hand while laughing. He doesn't stand in the afternoon sun for hours at a barbecue. But the human mind is a terrifyingly resilient machine when it comes to protecting itself from trauma. As the sun began to bleed through the single, filthy window near my ceiling, casting a gray, sickly light over my unmade bed, I began to rationalize. I built excuses out of thin air. It was a good day, I told myself, rubbing my trembling hands over my face. Terminal patients have good days. The treatments are working. That's why he looks so healthy. He was probably just holding the cooler for a second, posing for the camera. Aunt Sarah always makes people pose. I needed it to be true. I needed the lie to hold because the alternative was a psychological abyss I was entirely unprepared to fall into. If the photo was what it looked like, it meant the last 18 months of my life. The starvation diet, the 60-hour work weeks, the loss of my dream home, the constant, gnawing anxiety were all for nothing. It meant my own parents had looked me in the eye, weaponized my deepest love for them, and systematically robbed me. At 8 a.m., my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, I picked up my phone. I dialed my parents' house. It rang 3 times before my mother picked up, her voice instantly dropping into the hushed, weary register she always used with me lately. "David, honey, it's early. Is everything okay?" "Hi, Mom," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I'm fine, just getting ready for work. How is Dad?" A heavy, dramatic sigh came through the receiver. "He had a rough night, sweetie. His chest was very tight. We had to use the supplemental oxygen for a few hours. He's sleeping now." I squeezed my eyes shut. The oxygen, another prop in the theater of my financial ruin. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, forcing the words out. "I actually called because, well, I saw a photo on Facebook. Aunt Sarah posted some pictures from a barbecue yesterday." There was a microsecond of silence, a tiny, almost imperceptible hesitation on the line. Then her voice returned, perfectly smooth. "Oh yes, Sarah's little get-together. We only stayed for about 20 minutes, David. Your father just wanted to see the family. It's so hard for him, being cooped up." I saw a picture of him, I pressed, my knuckles turning white as I gripped the phone. He was standing by the grill. He was holding a heavy-looking cooler, Mom. He looked really good. He didn't look like he needed oxygen. The atmosphere on the call shifted instantly. The weary, grateful mother vanished, replaced by something sharp and defensive. "I cannot believe you, David," she snapped, her tone dripping with sudden, venomous indignation. "Are you seriously interrogating me? Are you questioning your father's illness because of a stupid photograph?" "No, I'm just asking." He was holding an empty cooler, David. He picked it up for 2 seconds because Sarah asked him to move it, and he didn't want to feel useless. He paid for it the rest of the night. He was in agony when we got home, but of course you don't see that. You just sit in your apartment and judge us from afar. "Mom, I'm not judging, I'm just confused. You said he couldn't leave the house." "We are doing the best we can," she suddenly wailed, a sharp, piercing sound that instinctively made me recoil. It was the exact same tone she had used the night she asked for the money. "We are living in a nightmare, watching him deteriorate, and you are playing detective over a Facebook photo. Do you know how much that hurts? If you want to stop paying for his treatments, David, just say it. Just say you want him to die so you can have your money back." "Stop it," I pleaded, my chest tight with a familiar, suffocating guilt. "You know that's not true." "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have brought it up." "I have to go," she said coldly. "I need to check his vitals." The line went dead. I sat there for a long time, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. She had won the battle, but the war had quietly begun. The seed of doubt had taken root, and no amount of guilt tripping could stop it from growing. Over the next 3 months, months 15 through 17 of my indentured servitude, I became a silent observer. I stopped asking questions. I continued making the $3,000 transfers on the first of every month, like clockwork, but I was no longer a blind, compliant victim. I was watching. The red flags, once invisible, began to look like neon signs. In month 16, my mother casually mentioned they would be unreachable for a week. Dr. Evans, she claimed, recommended a holistic healing retreat in Arizona, a place with dry air and specialized meditative therapy to lower his blood pressure and ease the strain on his heart. She assured me it was entirely covered by a charity grant they had miraculously found online. I said nothing. I wished them a safe trip, but the weekend they left, I ate expired ramen noodles while debugging code for a local plumber's website just to afford my gas bill. Later that week, I logged into Facebook using a fake profile I had created. My mother had blocked my real account from seeing certain posts, claiming she didn't want to worry me with her emotional venting. On the fake profile, I saw the truth of their healing retreat. It wasn't a medical facility in Arizona. It was a luxury couple's resort in Boca Raton, Florida. There were photos of my dying father sipping piña coladas by a massive infinity pool, his skin tanned, wearing expensive new sunglasses. There was a photo of them at a five-star steakhouse, a massive tomahawk ribeye sitting on the plate in front of him. A man with a failing, rigid heart, eating a massive cut of red meat and drinking liquor in the Florida heat. I didn't confront them. I just saved the photos to a secure, encrypted folder on my hard drive. My shock was rapidly evolving into a cold, clinical fury. I was a systems architect. My entire career was built on finding anomalies, tracing errors to their source, and dismantling broken structures. My family was a broken structure, and I was going to map every single infected line of code. The missing piece of the puzzle, the true anomaly in the system, was Leo. My younger brother had been practically a ghost since the diagnosis. My parents claimed he was working multiple odd jobs, desperately trying to help out, too ashamed of his meager contributions to face me. But knowing what I knew now, I turned my investigative lens toward him. Leo was not a mastermind. He was deeply, painfully arrogant, and arrogant people cannot resist an audience. I knew he had an Instagram account, though he had blocked my primary handle years ago after I refused to loan him $5,000 for a guaranteed crypto flip. I used a VPN and a fresh burner account. I searched his known usernames. It didn't take long to find him. His profile was public. The bio read, Leo Vance, entrepreneur, visionary, self-made, grindset. I clicked on his most recent grid, my breath caught in my throat. Leo was standing in what appeared to be a stunning, ultra-modern high-rise apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased a sweeping, panoramic view of the downtown skyline. The kitchen behind him featured imported Calicut marble countertops, sleek matte black cabinetry, and a massive Sub-Zero refrigerator. The caption read, New HQ, the grind never stops. When you believe in your vision, the universe provides. Big things coming. CEO luxury living self-made. He was wearing a designer watch. He was holding a glass of champagne. He looked exactly like the insufferable, entitled brat he had always been, but magnified by wealth. Wealth that he did not have. Wealth that my parents, drowning in a second mortgage, did not have. I scrolled through his feed. The posts went back exactly 16 months. 16 months ago, he was posting from a dingy rented room. Then, abruptly, 15 months ago, right around the time my father's treatments began taking full effect, he moved into this palace. There were photos of him lounging on a sprawling, customized modular sofa. Photos of a massive 80-inch flat screen. But what caught my eye, what made my blood freeze in my veins, was a photo posted just 3 weeks ago. It was a selfie of Leo in the kitchen. In the background, sitting at the marble island, eating a bowl of cereal, was my father. He was wearing a plush, hotel-style bathrobe. He looked perfectly at home. The jigsaw puzzle in my mind violently snapped together. The picture it formed so grotesque, so profoundly evil, that I actually felt physically ill. I sprinted to the tiny bathroom in my basement apartment and dry-heaved over the toilet. There was no heart condition. There was no Dr. Evans. There were no investigational peptide infusions. My parents had orchestrated the most elaborate, emotionally devastating con imaginable. They had watched me move into a slum. They had watched me age 5 years in 18 months. They had taken $54,000 of my blood, sweat, and sanity to buy Leo a luxury penthouse. And they were using it as their own personal vacation home. I washed my face with freezing water, staring at my hollow, gray reflection in the mirror. The man looking back at me was dead. The fixer, the loyal son, the endless reservoir of forgiveness, he died right there on the cracked linoleum floor of that bathroom. In his place was someone entirely different. I needed absolute, undeniable proof. I needed the paper trail. Month 18 arrived. Before I made the transfer, I initiated the final phase of my investigation. I called my parents on a Tuesday evening. My mother answered, her tone immediately adopting that sickening, breathy frailty. "Hi, David," she murmured. "Your father is resting. We had a tough day with the infusions." "I need Dr. Evans' contact information," I said. My voice was completely flat, devoid of any emotion. It wasn't a request. "What?" she asked, a sudden edge of panic breaking through the performance. "Why?" "I'm being audited by the IRS," I lied smoothly, tapping my fingers rhythmically on my desk. "Because I've been transferring $3,000 a month under the guise of a medical gift. They need a formal letter from the attending physician, along with the diagnostic codes, to clear the deduction. Otherwise, they're going to hit me with a massive tax penalty, and I won't be able to make next month's payment." Silence, a long, agonizing silence. I could practically hear the gears grinding in her head as she realized she was boxed in. I can't do that, David," she stammered. "Dr. Evans is highly private. He runs a specialized clinic. He doesn't just hand out files." "It's a federal audit, Mom. He doesn't have a choice. Just give me the clinic name and his phone number. I'll have my accountant handle the subpoenas." "Subpoenas," she shrieked, the panic escalating into full-blown hysteria. "You are bringing the government into this. Are you out of your mind?" "If it's a legitimate medical expense, there's nothing to worry about," I replied, cold as ice. "I need the records, Mom, or the money stops today." "You selfish, ungrateful bastard," she screamed. The mask didn't just slip, it shattered. "After everything we've done for you, after we raised you, you're going to put a price tag on your father's life over taxes. You want to audit your own dying father. Give me the doctor's name." "There is no doctor who will talk to you because you're a monster," she roared. "You don't deserve to speak to him. Don't you ever call here disrespecting us like this again. We are your parents." She slammed the phone down. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel guilty. I felt an immense, soaring clarity. They couldn't produce a doctor because he didn't exist. They went straight to the nuclear option, abusive rage, because they had no logic left to stand on. I hung up the phone and opened my laptop. I wasn't just going to stop paying them. Stopping the payments was too easy. It would allow them to walk away with $54,000 of my money. No, I was going to dismantle their entire universe. I pulled up Leo's Instagram again. I opened the photo of the skyline view from his balcony. I took a screenshot and imported it into a photo editing software. I zoomed in on the buildings outside his window. I identified 3 distinct landmarks: a specific bank tower, a uniquely shaped hotel, and the spire of a historic church. Using Google Earth, I triangulated the sightlines. I moved the digital camera through the 3D map of downtown until the perspective perfectly matched the photo on Leo's Instagram. The intersecting lines converged on exactly one building, the Azure. A recently completed, hyper-luxury residential tower in the most expensive zip code in the city. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I navigated to the county clerk's public property records portal. "This database is entirely open to the public if you know how to use it." I typed in the address for the Azure. I began filtering the ownership records, looking for sales that occurred roughly 15 to 16 months ago. There were dozens of units, but I knew what I was looking for. I searched for the last name, Vance. Nothing, I frowned, leaning back in my chair. Okay, they aren't completely stupid, I thought. They wouldn't put it in their own names. They have terrible credit. Leo has no income history. I changed my search parameters. I looked at all units sold in that timeframe, filtering out corporate buyers and focusing on individual LLCs or trust documents. I pulled up the tax assessment for Unit 4205. The owner was listed as Visionary Holdings LLC. I opened the state's corporate registry database and searched for Visionary Holdings LLC. It was registered 16 months ago. The registered agent and sole managing member, Leonard Vance. A dark, humorless smile crept across my face. Got you, but owning an LLC was only half the puzzle. How did an unemployed 30-year-old and two parents drowning in consumer debt finance a luxury condo? They couldn't walk into a Chase or Bank of America and get a mortgage. No underwriter in the country would approve them. I went back to the county clerk's portal. I pulled the actual deed and the recorded mortgage documents for Unit 4205. The PDFs took a few seconds to load, the little circular icon spinning on my screen. My heart beat a slow, heavy rhythm. The document appeared: Deed of Trust. Borrower, Visionary Holdings LLC, Leonard Vance, Guarantor. Lender, Apex Financial Solutions. I immediately opened a new tab and searched for Apex Financial Solutions. It wasn't a bank. It was a private, hard money lender, a subprime outfit that specialized in high-risk, high-interest loans for people with terrible credit, usually requiring a massive down payment and predatory interest rates. My parents must have drained their second mortgage just to cover the down payment for Leo, but it was the next page of the PDF that truly took my breath away. It was the promissory note. I scrolled down to the payment terms. Principal amount, $480,000. Interest rate, 11.5%. Term, 30 years. I opened my calculator app. I crunched the numbers. A $480,000 loan at 11.5% interest over 30 years. The monthly principal and interest payment was $47.53. Wait, that didn't make sense. The number was $3,000. Why did my parents ask for exactly $3,000? I dug deeper into the documents. I found a rider attached to the loan. It was an interest-only balloon mortgage for the first 5 years. A desperate, incredibly stupid way to finance a property, designed purely to keep the initial monthly payments lower before a massive balloon payment came due. I recalculated based on the interest-only terms. $480,000, 11.5% equals $55,200 annual interest. $55,200 / 12 months equals $4,600. Still not $3,000. I was missing something. I scoured the county records again. I looked at the HOA filings for the Azure. The monthly HOA fee for a unit on the 42nd floor was $800. So the true cost was $4,600, mortgage plus $800, HOA, $5,400 a month. Where was the other $2,400 coming from? I sat in the dark, the glow of the screen illuminating my face, thinking about my father's supposed second mortgage, thinking about the sheer desperation in my mother's voice when she told me to send the money. And then I realized the most pathetic, hilarious truth of it all. They couldn't afford it even with my money. My parents had leveraged themselves to the absolute breaking point. They were likely using Dad's dwindling pension or maxing out credit cards to cover their half of Leo's absurd lifestyle, and they had emotionally extorted me to cover the remaining deficit. My $3,000 was exactly the bridge they needed to keep the entire fraudulent house of cards from collapsing. My blood and sweat were the only things keeping Apex Financial Solutions from taking the condo back. I downloaded every single document: the deed, the LLC registration, the mortgage note, the HOA filings. I put them in a folder labeled The Cure. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I put on a pair of dark jeans, a black hoodie, and a baseball cap. I drove downtown. I parked 3 blocks away from the Azure and walked toward the towering spire of glass and steel. It was magnificent. The lobby was all white marble, brass fixtures, and armed security guards. A valet was parking a line of Porsches and Mercedes. I stood across the street, leaning against a brick wall, watching the entrance. I didn't have a plan yet, just an overwhelming compulsion to see the crime scene with my own eyes. I waited for 3 hours in the biting wind. Just as I was about to give up, a black Uber SUV pulled up to the curb. The valet opened the door. Out stepped my mother. She was wearing a tailored coat I had never seen before, carrying several high-end shopping bags from boutiques I knew she couldn't afford. Following her out of the SUV was my father. No oxygen tank, no wheelchair. He stepped out briskly, looking annoyed as he checked his watch, and finally out stepped Leo. He was laughing, tossing a set of keys to the valet. He threw his arm around our father's shoulder, pointing up at the building. My father laughed, clapping Leo on the back. My mother smiled, adjusting her designer bags. They looked like the perfect, wealthy, happy family. They walked through the revolving glass doors of the luxury tower, disappearing into the marble lobby, financed entirely by the sun currently standing across the street, shivering in a cheap hoodie, living on boiled rice. I didn't yell. I didn't run across the street. I just stood there, watching the revolving door spin to a stop. The anger I felt wasn't hot, it wasn't explosive, it was absolute zero. It was a cold, calculating, mathematical certainty. They had built their paradise on my back, using a high-risk loan they couldn't afford, held by a private lender who only cared about the bottom line. I was a systems architect. I knew how to find the single point of failure in a complex system. And as I turned away from the Azure and walked back to my car, I knew exactly how I was going to tear their entire world down, brick by imported marble brick. The drive back to my basement apartment was the quietest 30 minutes of my life. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't roll down the windows to let in the biting city air. I simply gripped the steering wheel, my mind operating with the terrifying, frictionless efficiency of a supercomputer that had finally been given its ultimate directive. For 18 months, I had been drowning in a sea of manufactured chaos, reacting to emotional emergencies, scrambling to plug holes in a sinking ship that I now knew was a luxury yacht. But seeing them walk into the Azure, seeing my supposedly dying father clap my parasitic brother on the back, as they vanished into a marble palace paid for by my starvation, had recalibrated my entire psychology. The suffocating fog of guilt and anxiety was gone. In its place was a crystalline, glacial calm. I was no longer a victim. I was a systems architect looking at a critically flawed network, and I was going to dismantle it from the inside out. The moment I walked through the door of my dingy, cabbage-smelling apartment, I opened my laptop. I didn't bother turning on the overhead lights. The glow of the screen was enough. I opened a new, encrypted spreadsheet and began to build my war room. My first task was understanding the exact legal mechanics of what I was about to do. In the real estate world, mortgages and promissory notes are not static agreements. They are commodities. They are bought and sold every single day on the secondary market. When a private, hard money lender like Apex Financial Solutions underwrites a high-risk loan for a borrower with garbage credit like my brother's, Visionary Holdings LLC, they aren't looking to hold that paper for 30 years. They make their money on the exorbitant origination fees, the upfront points, and the initial interest. Then, to free up their capital so they can underwrite the next desperate borrower, they often bundle and sell these notes to private investors, sometimes at a discount, transferring the right to collect the debt and the lien on the property. I was going to be that investor. I was going to buy my brother's debt, but there was a massive mathematical hurdle staring back at me from the spreadsheet. The principal balance on the loan was $480,000. While I had a phenomenal credit score and a lucrative salary, 18 months of bleeding $3,000 a month had decimated my liquidity. I had roughly $110,000 left in my investment accounts and savings, the remnants of my long-delayed house fund. It wasn't enough to buy the note outright. If I wanted to execute this execution flawlessly, I had to go all in. I had to leverage everything I had, burn my own boats, and push all my chips into the center of the table. I spent the next 3 weeks orchestrating the most aggressive financial maneuvering of my life. I didn't sleep more than 3 hours a night. I legally formed an LLC, naming it Obsidian Asset Management, registering it through a registered agent service in Delaware to ensure absolute anonymity. My name would not appear on any public-facing corporate registry. To the outside world, Obsidian would be a faceless, monolithic corporate entity. Next, I went to war for capital. I cashed out my entire 401k, swallowing the massive early withdrawal penalties with a grim smile. I liquidated my remaining stock portfolios. I sold my reliable, low-mileage sedan and bought a 15-year-old rusted beater for $2,000, adding the difference to the war chest. But I was still short. I scheduled a meeting with a commercial loan officer at my primary bank, a man I had worked with for years. Because my credit was practically perfect, my debt-to-income ratio, excluding the secret $3,000 a month I was sending my parents, was phenomenal, and I was using the physical real estate of a downtown luxury condo as collateral. I secured a specialized commercial investment loan to cover the remaining balance. By the end of the third week, Obsidian Asset Management had $500,000 in liquid, cleared capital sitting in a commercial holding account. I was armed. I was ready. On a Tuesday afternoon, I wore my best-tailored suit, the only remnant of my old life I hadn't sold or ruined, and drove out to the suburban corporate park where Apex Financial Solutions was headquartered. It wasn't a bank. It was a sterile, aggressively modern office suite filled with glass walls, cheap abstract art, and loan officers wearing flashy watches. It reeked of predatory lending and desperate borrowers. I walked up to the receptionist, handed her one of the embossed, matte black business cards I had printed for Obsidian Asset Management, and asked to speak to the managing director of their portfolio acquisitions. 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from a man named Sterling. He had slick back hair, a sharp jawline, and the calculating eyes of a shark who is used to bleeding people dry. "Mr. Vance," Sterling said, glancing at my card and then up at me. "Obsidian Asset Management. Can't say I'm familiar with your firm." "We're a boutique acquisition group, recently capitalized," I replied, my voice smooth, practiced, and entirely devoid of the trembling wreck I had been a month prior. "We specialize in acquiring high-yield, subprime residential paper. We're looking to expand our portfolio in the downtown luxury sector." Sterling leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. "Well, you've come to the right place. We originate a significant amount of hard money paper in that sector. We usually sell in bulk portfolios, though, tranches of 5 to 10 million. "We will get there," I said, offering a tight, professional smile. "But for our initial acquisition with Apex, to establish a working relationship and verify your underwriting standards, we are looking to cherry-pick a single, specific asset. If the paper performs, we will look at a multi-million-dollar tranche next quarter." Greed flickered in Sterling's eyes. A promise of future bulk buys was exactly what he wanted to hear. "All right. What specific asset are you looking at?" I slid a sleek black folder across his desk. Inside was the printed county record of Leo's mortgage. Unit 4205 at the Azure. The borrower is Visionary Holdings, LLC. It's a $480,000 note, interest-only balloon, sitting at 11.5%. We want to purchase the promissory note and the deed of trust. Sterling opened the folder, his eyes scanning the document. He frowned slightly. "Ah, the Vance file. Interesting you picked this one. The guarantor is a bit thin on paper. The down payment was substantial, which is why we underwrote it, but the debt-to-income ratio is practically non-existent. It's a high-flight risk." I know, I thought, a cold thrill shooting down my spine. "I know exactly how thin it is. We are comfortable with the risk profile," I said smoothly. "The underlying asset, the condo itself, has appreciated significantly in the last 16 months. Even if the borrower defaults, the collateral more than covers the principal. We are willing to take the paper off your hands today. 100 cents on the dollar for the outstanding principal balance. We wire the funds by close of business, and Apex clears $500,000 in liquidity without having to worry about a risky guarantor." Sterling stared at me for a long, quiet moment. In the hard money world, buying a note at full face value without demanding a discount was rare, but I wasn't there to haggle over pennies. I was there to buy a weapon, and I was willing to pay full price for it. "Full principal balance," Sterling repeated, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. "Clean transfer, no contingencies." "Clean transfer," I confirmed, not blinking. Obsidian Asset Management becomes the sole note holder, assignee, and beneficiary of the deed of trust. You endorse the note over to us, file the assignment with the county clerk, and Apex washes its hands of Visionary Holdings, LLC entirely. "Mr. Vance," Sterling said, standing up and extending his hand across the desk, "I think Obsidian and Apex are going to do a lot of great business together." The legal machinery took exactly 4 days to process. On a Friday morning, I received a certified courier package at my P.O. box. Inside was the original promissory note, thick with legal jargon and stamped with the county seal. At the very bottom, beneath my brother's arrogant, looping signature, was a new stamp: "Pay to the order of Obsidian Asset Management, LLC, without recourse. Apex Financial Solutions." I ran my fingers over the raised ink of the county seal. The sensation was electric. It was better than any drug, better than any promotion I had ever received. I owned them. Legally, contractually, and financially, my parents and my brother were now my indentured property. If they wanted to keep their marble countertops and their skyline views, they had to pay me. And I knew for an absolute mathematical fact that without my monthly $3,000 subsidy, they couldn't even cover the interest. The trap was fully constructed, armed, and buried under the leaves. All I had to do now was stop walking ahead of them and let them step on it. 3 days later, the first of the month arrived. Normally, by 8 o'clock a.m. on the 1st, my banking app would send me a notification. Automated transfer of $3,000 and 0 cents to VANCE E and M completed. It was a notification that had triggered nausea and dread in my gut for a year and a half. This morning, I sat at my cheap kitchen table, a cup of black coffee steaming in my hands. I opened my banking app. I navigated to the automated transfers page. I hovered my thumb over the glowing red delete button next to the recurring payment. I thought about my father, holding the empty cooler, laughing in the sun. I thought about my mother, wrapped in her designer coat, screaming at me that I was a monster for wanting to audit them. I thought about Leo tossing his keys to the valet, living like a king while I ate canned soup in a basement that smelled like decay. I pressed delete. The transfer vanished from the screen. The money, my money, stayed in my account. I took a slow, deep sip of my coffee. The silence in the apartment was profound. It was the silence of a fuse burning down to the powder keg. I didn't have to wait long for the explosion. At exactly 10:14 a.m., my phone vibrated on the table. The caller ID flashed. Mom's cell. I didn't answer. I just watched it buzz across the cheap veneer of the table until it went to voicemail. 10 minutes later, it buzzed again. Mom's cell. Ignored. At 10:45 a.m., a text message came through. David, did you change banks? The transfer didn't hit this morning. Dad has his infusion scheduled for tomorrow, and the clinic needs the payment up front. Please call me ASAP. The audacity of the lie, still being deployed even now, almost made me laugh out loud. I poured myself another cup of coffee and opened my laptop to do some freelance coding. I had a war chest to replenish. By 2:00 p.m., the tone of the text had shifted from confused to frantic. David, where are you? Are you at work? Why aren't you answering? This is an emergency. The bank says there are no pending transfers. By 5:00 p.m., the phone was ringing back to back. Mom's cell, Dad's cell. Even Leo, blocked number, tried to call, though my phone automatically rejected it. They were panicking. The first of the month was when the mortgage was due to Apex, and without my $3,000, their account was severely overdrawn. At 7:00 p.m., I finally checked my voicemails. I poured a glass of cheap bourbon, sat back in my chair, and pressed play. Beep. David, it's Mom. I don't know what kind of sick game you're playing, but you need to call me back right now. The clinic is threatening to cancel your father's appointment. Do you understand what that means? His heart cannot take a missed dose. Pick up the damn phone. Beep, David. It was my father. His voice was no longer weak or breathy. It was a low, threatening growl. You answer your phone when your mother calls you. Whatever tantrum you're throwing over that IRS bullshit, you need to knock it off. Transfer the money. Now. Beep, you little piece of shit. My mother again. The background noise sounded like the echoing acoustics of a high-rise lobby. She was losing her mind. You are killing him. You are literally murdering your father. I will call the police. I will tell everyone in the family what you are doing. You selfish, greedy, arrogant bastard. Transfer the money. I listened to 6 more voicemails, each one escalating in volume, profanity, and emotional terrorism. They pulled every lever they had. They threatened to disown me. They threatened to drive to my apartment, a bluff, since they had refused to ever visit my depressing basement. They sent pictures of my father looking mournfully out a window. I didn't respond to a single one. I initiated a total, blackout-level radio silence. I blocked their numbers on my phone, setting the parameters so their voicemails would still go to a hidden folder for my own amusement, but my phone would never ring. I blocked them on social media. I blocked my extended family to prevent flying monkeys from infiltrating my peace. For the next 30 days, I lived in absolute, glorious silence. My bank account began to grow again. My skin started to regain its color. I slept for 8 uninterrupted hours a night. The tremor in my left hand vanished entirely. But behind the scenes, the legal machinery of Obsidian Asset Management was ruthlessly churning. When a borrower misses a mortgage payment, the lender doesn't immediately seize the house. There is a legal process, a timeline. On the 5th of the month, the grace period expired. The loan was officially delinquent. On the 15th of the month, acting as the managing member of Obsidian Asset Management, I hired a third-party legal servicing firm to draft the first formal notice of default. I didn't want my name anywhere near the paperwork yet. I wanted them to think they were just dealing with a faceless, bureaucratic entity. The servicing firm mailed the notice of default via certified mail to Unit 4205 at the Azure. I knew exactly how my family would react to it. They would look at the letterhead, Obsidian Asset Management, noting that Apex had evidently sold their loan, and they would throw it in the trash. They were professional debt dodgers. They had spent their entire lives dodging credit card collectors, utility companies, and repo men. They believed that if you ignored a problem long enough or cried hard enough on the phone, the corporate machine would eventually get tired and go away. They believed they were smarter than the system. The second month rolled around. No payment. The frantic voicemails to my blocked folder had evolved into a bizarre mix of begging and venomous hatred. Leo had even left one, his voice dripping with entitled fury, calling me a broke loser who was jealous of his success, completely oblivious to the irony that his success was entirely reliant on my stolen wages. On the 45th day of delinquency, I escalated the timeline. I didn't just mail a letter this time. I hired a private process server. I sat in my apartment, watching the GPS tracker the process server provided via a secure link. I watched the little blue dot move through downtown, stop at the Azure, and enter the building. 20 minutes later, I received a text from the server. Target served, hand-delivered to Leonard Vance. Subject became highly agitated and threw the documents on the floor, but service is legally complete. The document delivered was the formal notice of acceleration and intent to foreclose. It explicitly stated that the borrower was in breach of the promissory note, and unless the total past due balance, plus late fees, plus default interest at 24%, a beautiful little clause hidden in Apex's original hard money paperwork, was paid in full within 30 days, Obsidian Asset Management would execute its right to foreclose and auction the property. I checked my hidden voicemail folder later that night. There was a message from an unknown number. It was my mother using a burner phone or a friend's device. "David," she whispered. Her voice was hollow, stripped of the usual theatrics. It sounded like genuine, unadulterated panic. "David, please, we are in trouble. Something happened with with his business. His investors are pulling out. We got a legal notice today. They're trying to take his apartment. We put all our money into this, David. Your father's pension is tied up in it. We have nothing left. If he loses this, we lose everything. We'll be on the street. Please, I know you're angry, but we need you. We need the money. Just $10,000 to hold them off. Please, call me." I sat in the dark, the glow of my monitor reflecting in my eyes, and smiled. His investors. She still couldn't tell the truth. Even staring down the barrel of total ruin, she couldn't admit that the only investor Leo ever had was me. They thought Obsidian Asset Management was a ruthless Wall Street firm about to crush them. They thought I was their only escape hatch. I deleted the voicemail. The clock ticked down. 60 days delinquent, 75 days delinquent, 90 days, because they had signed a deed of trust with a power of sale clause, standard for hard money loans in this state. I didn't have to go through a lengthy judicial foreclosure process, dragging it out through the courts for a year. It was a non-judicial foreclosure. Obsidian Asset Management had the legal right to bypass a judge and schedule a trustee's sale directly. I authorized my legal servicing firm to publish the notice of trustee's sale in the local newspaper, as required by law. It ran for 3 consecutive weeks. I bought a copy of the paper every Sunday, cutting out the tiny legal classification block and pinning it to a corkboard in my apartment like a hunting trophy. Notice of trustee's sale. Property, Unit 4205, The Azure. Owner, Visionary Holdings LLC. Beneficiary, Obsidian Asset Management LLC. To be sold at public auction on the steps of the county courthouse. The day of the auction arrived. It was a cold, overcast morning. I didn't attend in person. I had my legal proxy handle it. It didn't matter. In a non-judicial foreclosure, the lender is allowed to place a credit bid up to the total amount owed on the debt. Because I had inflated the debt with the maximum allowable late fees, default interest, and exorbitant legal processing costs, the total debt far exceeded what any casual real estate flipper would pay at a courthouse auction. The auction opened. My proxy placed the opening credit bid of $540,000. Nobody counterbid. The gavel fell. At 11:45 a.m., my proxy called me. "Mr. Vance, the auction is concluded." The property reverted to the beneficiary. Obsidian Asset Management is now the legal, fee-simple owner of record for Unit 4205. "Thank you," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. "What's the next step?" "We filed the trustee's deed upon sale with the county clerk this afternoon. Once it's recorded, they are legally no longer the owners. They are holdover tenants, squatters. We can issue the final 3-day notice to quit, and if they don't vacate, we file for the unlawful detainer to get the sheriff involved." "File it," I commanded. "File the 3-day notice tomorrow morning. When they inevitably ignore it, Get the writ of possession as fast as the court will issue it. I want the sheriff there." "Understood, Mr. Vance." I hung up the phone. I walked over to the corkboard. I took down the newspaper clippings, the printed county records, the screenshots of Leo's Instagram, and the photo of my father holding the cooler. I threw them all in the trash. I didn't need the war room anymore. The war was over. I had won. The final domino had fallen, and all that was left was to walk into that penthouse and watch the devastation wash over them when they realized exactly who held the deed to their lives. I went to my closet, pulled out my best suit, and began to iron it. I wanted to look my absolute best when I became the bank. The legal system is a slow, grinding beast, but when fueled by the unyielding precision of properly filed paperwork and a complete lack of opposition, it eventually bears its teeth. After the foreclosure auction, the legal reality of my family's situation was absolute. They were no longer homeowners. They were not tenants with rights. In the eyes of the state, they were trespassers holding over on a property owned by Obsidian Asset Management, LLC. My servicing firm had delivered the mandatory 3-day notice to quit, ordering them to vacate the premises or face forced removal. Predictably, the notice was ignored. They had likely assumed it was just another threatening letter from a faceless corporate entity, another piece of paper to throw in the trash while they scrambled to find some magical bailout or another gullible relative to fleece. When the 3 days expired in silence, my attorney filed the unlawful detainer lawsuit because they failed to respond to the court summons, again, demonstrating their profound arrogance and detachment from reality. We won a default judgment. The judge signed the writ of possession. The final countdown had begun. The morning of the eviction was a crisp, brilliantly clear Tuesday in early April. I woke up at 5 a.m. in my basement apartment, but for the first time in 18 months, the smell of old cabbage and the rattling pipes didn't bother me. Today was the last day I would ever wake up in this slum. I took a long, hot shower. I shaved meticulously. I put on the charcoal gray tailored suit I had ironed the night before, a crisp white shirt, and a dark crimson tie. I polished my Oxford shoes until they gleamed. I didn't dress like a son going to see his family. I dressed like an executioner attending a corporate liquidation. At 8:30 a.m., I drove downtown and parked my rusted beater car in a public garage a block away from the Azure. The air was biting, but I didn't feel the cold. I walked to the towering glass entrance of the luxury high-rise, bypassing the valet, and stepped into the sprawling, white marble lobby. Waiting for me by the concierge desk were 2 uniformed deputies from the county sheriff's civil division. They looked bored, holding a clipboard thick with official court documents. This was just another Tuesday morning for them. For me, it was the culmination of a year and a half of starvation, betrayal, and meticulous, calculated vengeance. "Mr. Vance," the older deputy asked, checking his clipboard as I approached. "Yes, representing Obsidian Asset Management," I replied, my voice steady and cold. I handed him my identification and the notarized paperwork confirming my status as the managing member of the LLC. The deputy glanced at it, nodded, and handed it back. "All right, Mr. Vance, we have the writ. We'll go up, knock, and announce our presence. If they don't open, management has provided the master key. Once we secure the premises and ensure there are no weapons or threats, you can enter. They will have exactly 20 minutes to gather whatever personal necessities they can carry: clothes, medications, wallets. Everything else stays, and you can deal with the property as you see fit. Understood?" "Perfectly," I said. We stepped into the private, high-speed elevator reserved for the upper floors. The digital display above the door ticked upward at a dizzying pace. 10, 20, 30, 40. My stomach didn't drop. My hands weren't shaking. The tremor that had plagued me for a year was completely gone. I felt a profound, terrifying stillness. The elevator chimed a soft, melodic note, and the polished brass doors slid open, revealing the hushed, carpeted hallway of the 42nd floor. We walked down the corridor, the silence broken only by the heavy, authoritative thud of the deputy's boots. We stopped in front of Unit 4205. The heavy oak door had a sleek, modern brushed steel handle. The older deputy stepped forward and pounded his fist against the wood. The sound was deafening in the quiet hallway. "County Sheriff," he barked, his voice echoing. "Open the door. We have a court order for eviction." Silence from inside. I could picture them scrambling, looking at each other in panic. They had lived their entire lives believing the rules didn't apply to them. The reality of the law was currently hammering on their door. The deputy pounded again, louder this time. "Sheriff's Department, Open the door now, or we will use the master key to make entry. I heard the muffled sound of a deadbolt clicking. The door slowly swung inward. Standing in the entryway, wearing a pair of silk pajamas and a terrified expression, was Leo. His hair was messy, and his eyes were bloodshot, completely devoid of the arrogant CEO persona he broadcasted to the world. He looked past the deputies, scanning the hallway, trying to understand what was happening. What is this? Leo stammered, backing up as the two large deputies stepped into the marble-floored foyer. You can't just barge in here. I own this place. Not anymore, sir, the older deputy said firmly, stepping inside and holding up the court order. This property was foreclosed on and sold at auction. You were served a notice to quit and a court summons, which you ignored. We are executing a writ of possession. You and anyone else in this unit have 20 minutes to gather your essential personal belongings and vacate the premises. No, 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 wait, Leo cried, panic finally shattering his composure. There's a mistake. My investors are working on a bridge loan. We are negotiating with the bank. There is no negotiation, sir. The property belongs to Obsidian Asset Management. Is there anyone else in the unit? What's going on out here? My mother's voice rang out from the kitchen. She walked into the entryway, wearing a plush, hotel-style bathrobe, holding a ceramic mug of coffee. My father followed closely behind her, wearing matching pajamas. The dying man looked perfectly healthy, though his face drained of all color the second he saw the badges and the holstered sidearms of the deputies. Mom, there. They're trying to kick us out, Leo said, his voice cracking like a frightened child. They said the place was sold. My mother's eyes widened in sheer horror. No, you can't. My husband is a very sick man. He has a severe heart condition. He can't be subjected to this kind of stress. We need more time. The gaslighting was so deeply ingrained in her that it was her default defense mechanism, even against law enforcement. She clutched her chest, performing the role of the frail, desperate caregiver perfectly. Ma'am, I suggest you use your 20 minutes to gather your husband's medications. Then, the younger deputy said, entirely unmoved by her theatrics. Because you are leaving this unit today, the new property owner's representative is here to take possession. The older deputy turned and looked back into the hallway. He nodded at me. Mr. Vance, the premises are secure. You can come in. I stepped out of the shadows of the corridor and walked into the bright, sunlit foyer of Unit 4205. For a moment, time seemed to completely stop. My mother, my father, and my brother stared at me. The confusion on their faces was palpable. They looked at my tailored suit, my polished shoes, the cold, impassive expression on my face. For 3 full seconds, their brains couldn't process the visual data. Then the tragic, predictable narrative of their delusion took over. My mother let out a gasp of pure, ecstatic relief. Tears immediately sprang to her eyes. David, she sobbed, dropping her coffee mug on the marble floor where it shattered into a dozen pieces. Oh my God, David, you came. You got my voicemails. You came to help us. She rushed forward, throwing her arms open, fully expecting me to embrace her, pull out a checkbook, and magically pay off the sheriff's deputies to make the bad men go away. She thought I was the cavalry. I didn't move a single muscle. I stood perfectly rigid, my hands clasped in front of me, and let her stop dead in her tracks, a foot away from me, repelled by the absolute zero temperature of my glare. David, she whispered, her arms slowly dropping to her sides. What? What are you doing? Tell them they're making a mistake. Tell them you'll pay the arrears. We can fix this. My father stepped forward, his face flushed with sudden, desperate anger. Where have you been? You disappeared for months while we were drowning. Pay these officers whatever the hell they want and get them out of my son's house. Leo just stared at me, his jaw working silently, a dawning realization creeping into his eyes. I looked at my mother. I looked at my father. I looked at the imported marble countertops in the kitchen behind them, the massive flat-screen television, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. I thought about the basement apartment. I thought about the $54,000. I thought about the sheer, unadulterated terror I felt the night I thought my father was dying. I'm not here to pay the arrears, I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried through the cavernous living room like a gunshot. What do you mean? My mother stammered, looking from me to the deputies and back again. Then why are you here? You're our son. You're supposed to help us. I am not here as your son, I said, locking eyes with her, and I'm not here as Leo's brother. I reached into the inner pocket of my suit jacket and pulled out the thick, notarized stack of closing documents from the foreclosure auction. I held them up, ensuring the bold logo of Obsidian Asset Management was clearly visible. "I am the managing member of Obsidian Asset Management," I stated, the words tasting like vintage wine on my tongue. "I bought Leo's high-interest, subprime loan from Apex Financial Solutions 3 months ago. I bought the promissory note, and I bought the deed of trust. When you missed your payments because I finally stopped subsidizing your fraud, you defaulted on my loan. I accelerated the debt, I foreclosed on the property, and I bought it at auction." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating vacuum. I watched the reality of my words physically impact them. My father actually staggered backward, bumping into the wall. His mouth opened and closed like a fish suffocating on dry land. You bought the debt." "You're Obsidian," Leo whispered, his voice trembling, the final remnants of his ego shattering into dust. You evicted me." "Yes," I said smoothly, "I evicted you." "You monstrous psychopath," my mother suddenly screamed. The veil of the desperate, frail woman vanished, replaced by the feral, abusive narcissist I had finally unmasked. She lunged at me, her hands raised like claws. "You stole our home, you set us up, you planned this." Before she could even take 2 steps, the younger deputy intercepted her, grabbing her arm firmly and stepping between us. "Ma'am, you need to step back right now, or I will place you in handcuffs for assaulting the property owner." "He's not the owner, he's my son," she shrieked, struggling against the deputy's grip, her face contorted in pure rage. "He's a thief, we paid for this place. We put down the deposit." "With what money?" I asked, my voice cutting through her hysterics. "With the second mortgage you took out on your house. The house you're probably going to lose next because you don't have my $3,000 a month to keep the lights on." I stepped closer to them, entirely ignoring the flinching Leo and my paralyzed father. "You sat on a couch and cried real tears, telling me Dad's heart was stiffening. You watched me give up my apartment. You watched me eat boiled rice. You watched me grind myself into the dirt, working 70 hours a week, terrified that if I missed a single payment, my father would suffocate to death." I pointed a finger directly at my father. "And you let her do it. You took my money, my life savings, my future, and you used it to pay the monthly interest on a luxury penthouse for a 30-year-old parasite who has never worked a day in his life." "David, please," my father croaked, tears finally spilling down his cheeks. But they weren't tears of guilt, they were tears of defeat. "We made a mistake. We got in over our heads. We just wanted Leo to have a chance. We're family." "We were never a family," I replied coldly. "You were a parasite and I was the host, but the host woke up. You have exactly 15 minutes left to pack your bags before these officers physically remove you from my property for trespassing." "You can't do this," Leo sobbed, collapsing onto the expensive modular sofa, burying his face in his hands. "Where are we supposed to go? We have nothing." "I suggest you check the basement apartments on the south side," I said, turning my back on him. "I hear the rent is cheap, provided you don't mind the smell of cabbage." "Start packing." The next 15 minutes were a masterclass in pathetic, chaotic scrambling. Under the watchful, uncompromising eyes of the sheriff's deputies, the 3 of them rushed through the penthouse, grabbing clothes off hangers, stuffing toiletries into garbage bags, and sobbing hysterically. They tried to take the espresso machine. The deputy stopped them. They tried to take a piece of abstract art off the wall. The deputy stopped them. "Personal necessities only," the older deputy reiterated sternly. "The appliances and fixtures belong to the estate." At exactly 9:20 a.m., the deputies escorted my mother, my father, and my brother out of the front door of Unit 4205. They were each carrying 2 overflowing trash bags of clothes. They looked broken. Stripped of their stolen wealth, stripped of their lies, they were just 3 desperate, toxic people facing the reality they had built for themselves. My mother stopped in the hallway. She turned to look at me one last time as I stood in the doorway of the penthouse. The hatred in her eyes was toxic enough to kill, but it couldn't touch me anymore. I was behind bulletproof glass. "You are dead to me," she spat, her voice trembling with venom. "I have no son." "I know," I said. "Goodbye." I closed the heavy oak door. I engaged the deadbolt. I listened to their footsteps recede down the hallway, followed by the soft chime of the elevator doors closing. Then there was only silence. I stood alone in the magnificent, sprawling penthouse. The morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long pools of light across the hardwood floors. The air was still. The oppressive, suffocating weight that had rested on my chest for a year and a half was gone. I walked over to the windows and looked out at the city skyline, a profound sense of peace washing over me. I didn't keep the condo, of course. I had no desire to live in a monument to my family's delusion. My plan had always been purely financial. The real estate market downtown was fiercely competitive. Within 48 hours of the eviction, I had a luxury real estate broker walking through the unit. Because the condo was vacant, in pristine condition, and located in a highly desirable building, we listed it aggressively. It sold in 11 days. The buyer was an overseas investor who paid entirely in cash. The final sale price was $610,000. The financial breakdown was the ultimate vindicating poetry. After paying off the massive, high-interest commercial loan I had taken out to fund Obsidian Asset Management, covering the broker fees, the taxes, and the legal costs of the foreclosure, I walked away with a net cash profit of $142,000. I had recovered every single penny of the $54,000 my family had stolen from me under the guise of life-saving treatments. But more than that, I had secured an additional $88,000 in pure profit, essentially taking the equity my parents had foolishly dumped into the condo as a down payment. They had bankrolled my revenge. The aftermath for my family was a predictable, spectacular collapse. I didn't seek out information about them, but in a family network as prone to gossip as mine, the news inevitably filtered its way to me through distant cousins I hadn't yet blocked. Without my monthly subsidy, and without the illusion of Leo's success to string along their creditors, my parents' financial house of cards imploded. They couldn't afford the second mortgage on their suburban home. The bank foreclosed on them less than 6 months after I evicted them from the Azure. They were forced to move into a cramped, 2-bedroom apartment in a deeply undesirable part of the city. For the first time in his 31 years of life, Leo was forced to get a minimum wage job at a home improvement store just to help cover their rent. There were no more luxury vacations. There were no more marble countertops. There was only the grinding, inescapable reality of the poverty they had tried to outrun by using me as a stepping stone. As for me, I dissolved Obsidian Asset Management. The LLC had served its purpose. I took my original savings, combined it with the massive profit from the condo sale, and finally did what I had set out to do 2 years prior. I bought a house. It wasn't a penthouse in the city. It was a beautiful, sprawling 4-bedroom craftsman home in a quiet, heavily wooded suburb. It had a massive backyard, a wraparound porch, and a state-of-the-art kitchen. It was everything I had ever wanted. I am sitting on that porch right now, drinking a cup of coffee, listening to the birds in the trees. My bank accounts are full. My career is thriving. My phone is silent, free from the manipulative, tearful demands of people who only saw me as a resource to be mined. They say family is everything. They say blood is thicker than water. But I learned the hard way that sometimes the only way to cure an infection is to surgically remove it. I didn't just cut them off. I became the bank, I audited their lies, and I foreclosed on their toxic grip on my life. And as I watched the sun set over my own property, bought and paid for in full, I have never slept better.